Right.
So what that means is, so like say, for example, a rudimentary example, let's say that your parents were a little bit volatile around the house when you were growing up. So let's say that, maybe you said something a little bit out of turn and you'd kind of get shouted at.
Right.
So let's say that happened repeatedly as a kid. So what you might do is you might kind of form a belief that every time you kind of say something a little bit wrong, the person's going to be really upset with you because that's happened in the past and it's kind of got repeated.
Sure.
So in your brain, that causes a little filter. So it's kind of like the glasses in which you're looking out through the world.
Yeah.
So you kind of think, well, if you've got that belief sitting around your brain, then what happens is every time something kind of similar to that thing happens, you interpret that event into your filter.
Right.
And you kind of delete out every other possibility. So you're kind of fitting in experience to what you believe as opposed to just seeing experience or events for what they are. Yeah. And it's quite a serious thing because if you kind of like, if you've got beliefs like that you're not lovable or that people don't like you or, that people get upset with you, then that becomes your kind of experience. You know? It's like
and it totally would perpetuate itself.
Exactly. And it becomes so that it kind of adds to the chain that you've already got in your brain, which is like, see, I knew that person was always upset with me. Or see, I knew I was unlovable. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, because it's interesting too, like I've just seen, friends, and I think this is how we came up with this, I've just seen friends labour over text messages that they get. And I'm like, why don't you just take it as it says instead of, if you didn't respond in 10 minutes, does that mean X, Y, and Z?
Exactly. So we're always attributing meaning. So your brain's always looking for meanings for stuff. And the meaning you attribute depends on your kind of past history and what you believe about yourself, what you believe about life and stuff like that. So it kind of breeds this, this ability to wind yourself up and take yourself into all these twists and turns based on what you think might be happening and the meaning that you attribute to it. And that doesn't have to be just childhood stuff. Like you could have a couple of experiences that maybe weren't so positive in a certain area. And then you might believe, well, maybe I'm not very good at that job, or, maybe that person doesn't like me so much because I haven't been so friendly.
Yeah.
So when you send an email and maybe they don't reply in like 10 minutes, as you say, then your brain starts thinking, well, obviously that means that they're annoyed. Or
you fill in the gaps,
You fill in the gaps. And I think with modern communication, there's a bigger gap because we've kind of lost that natural way of communicating that we used to.
Well, I even find now it's like... I've been trying to practice, like, if there is a misunderstanding, to actually force myself to phone the person.
Yeah.
Which is really hard because I've got this aversion to conflict.
Yeah.
But most people do. Yeah. Lots of people do.
My biggie is actually is the attributions I put on not getting a reply.
Yeah.
And so it totally, I think what you're saying really resonates because depending on the kind of day you're having, like if you're feeling a bit down or whatever, and you're focusing on that, and they don't reply, you're like, well, this is obviously a personal attack.
Yes, exactly.
Whereas on another day when you're busy, you're feeling pretty good, whatever, you wouldn't even think about it.
Yeah, so that kind of line changes depending on how you feel. Yeah. And when we're tired, it's kind of like that's the time when when we're not able to kind of think as positively as when we're kind of, refreshed and we've got lots of nutrients in our body and we're kind of doing well.
Yeah.
So when we're kind of tired and stressed out, that stuff starts to change. We can't access some of those thoughts.
And then it can often perpetuate something because something that maybe meant nothing to start with then brings up all sorts of other things and suddenly you are in an argument.
Yeah, so the third thing that happens, so the third part of the problem is that you respond to that misinterpretation. So you kind of get something, you think it means something, you kind of wind yourself up about it, and then you respond based on that and not what the person may have initially intended or meant.
Yeah.
And that can kind of cause that escalation or that cycle. Yeah. So it's quite interesting, like with my partner and I, we notice that when we're together personally, that we don't have any problems with communication at all. So we kind of, we understand what each other means, we can kind of say what we mean, we can express ourselves really well. And when one of us is away, like if text or email becomes the only form of communication, then we noticed that it could be quite like that. They were kind of misinterpreting things. And so we had to sit down and talk about it. Like we had to talk about, what we kind of mean by the words and the nature in which they're intended. And so what we've developed is like a way of being able to check, which I think is quite a nice agreement to have in a relationship, that if you kind of get a sense of the patterns of, what is the problem, like what is getting most misinterpreted, or what are you thinking it's meaning the most, and then kind of have an agreement that that's okay to check.
Check in. Yeah.
So that's kind of the solution part.
Cool.
So I think the thing, because this can happen all the time, and as you say, it kind of depends on where you are that day and what kind of relationship it is. And it's kind of, it more happens when it's important, like if it's an important relationship, or,
totally.
The threat is higher, I guess, that the possibility of this not being okay is kind of a higher threat.
Yeah.
So the first thing to do is just be aware that the meaning that you attribute is not necessarily true. So we often call it, the map is not the territory. So it's kind of like the map that you make of the world in your head is not necessarily what's really out there.
Yeah.
And that's just so open depending on experiences that you've had and the day that you've had, so on and so forth. So the first thing to know is it's not necessarily true. And the second thing, I guess, when there's a kind of gap in terms of time, like you've sent a text and it might be a couple of days until you get a reply. Like, to stop that cycle of thinking is kind of to really remind yourself that you don't know what it means until you've checked.
Yeah.
Because the possibility of meanings are endless. They could be tired, their phone battery could have run out.
Or in the case of that I've had, is the message never actually got there.
And that's another thing.
The phone networks are
modern technology. It has issues. So deciding that you don't know what it means till you've checked. And so that can be quite a useful thing to tell yourself. It's like, well, it could mean that, but I don't know until I've checked, so I'm just going to leave that. And then the third thing to do, I think, is decide how important it is to you to actually check. So some of them can just be let go of, like some of them don't really matter, depending on the relationship and the kind of perceived threat if that relationship's not going so well. But some of them, if it's like your significant other or best friends or family members or whatever, then it probably is a worthwhile idea to check. But it's always going to be your call, because it's kind of like, I know I could be way off the mark here, but also maybe that's a little bit out of character. They usually write a longer text, so maybe that's kind of worth just checking out.
I think it's interesting too. Like I've when I was first together with my partner, we played a game actually, because there was a lot of misinterpreting going on because I have a lot of filters.
Yeah, so everyone does though.
Yeah, but what we used to do was it was a game called What Are You Saying? What Am I Hearing?
That's nice.
So he would say something and I'd be like, what? Blah, blah, blah. And he'd go, okay, hang on. What are you hearing?
Yeah.
And then I'd say, I'm hearing that you don't care about me and blah, blah, blah. And he'd be like, no, I'm just saying blah.
Yeah.
And then we could all go, oh, okay, and move on.
So
that's a nice game. What are you saying? What am I hearing? Yeah.
Good tip.
And that really takes into account the interpretation piece,
Yeah, and it gives, it doesn't ignore what you're saying or invalidate what you're feeling or how you're perceiving it. It recognises it and allows them to hear that, but without it becoming...
And it's not a blame.
Yeah, totally.
That's the thing. So that's kind of like you owning it as, you said this and it kind of felt like you meant this. Is that the case, as opposed to when you always undermine me?
Yeah, exactly. It actually really helped me to see when the biggest thing for me was going that often what I think somebody else means is completely wrong.
Yeah.
I'm just so off the mark.
Yeah.
And so it really helped me to be a bit more aware of my own interpretations as opposed to the truth.
Yeah, and then you can kind of get a grasp on what your filters are, right? You can kind of notice that you're making the same misinterpretation no matter what the relationship is, and that's something to be aware of. But the checking thing's important, and it's kind of what I said before, which is what sounds like you developed with your partner. It's just being able to kind of check, but to be able to do it without blame. So it's quite a delicate check, and it's a check that kind of preserves the relationship. So you don't want to damage, because that's what you want to avoid, is kind of reacting from your interpretation. So it's kind of about saying, when I got a text that was shorter than usual, I kind of felt that it meant that you weren't happy about something. Is that true? Or have I misunderstood that? So you're kind of pointing out the actual thing, but you're owning it as your interpretation, and it's just a very gentle check. So it's like, did you mean that, or did I get it completely wrong? And it leaves it really open for the person to say, well, actually, I wasn't feeling that great that day. Sorry about that. Or, actually, there was something I wanted to talk to you about. Or, I'm really sorry, I didn't realise that was a problem. It's not a problem for me. And just leave it open for them to kind of tell you. And it is their responsibility to tell you if something is wrong, so you can...
And I can see the other good thing about that could potentially be, like, even if that particular interchange wasn't anything, there wasn't actually anything at the heart of it, if there is an underlying issue, this is an opportunity for it to actually be brought up for discussion.
Very true, especially with a partner, because when you're first together, you're kind of working out how the other person's brain works.
How you communicate,
and the communication.
The languages.
Yes.
Like we talked about the languages of love.
I know,
the other time.
and it's just so important, eh? Like,
definitely.
It's just so interesting. But how you're communicating in words is a really big part of it.
Well, I think just as we move more and more to that, that online distanced sort of communication, that it can be really important.
I was going to say, Charlotte, I've got a big trip coming up where I'm going to be away for 3 months.
You have to.
So have you got any suggestions about little steps one might take because obviously communication will be not face-to-face at all.
I do have a suggestion.
I'm all ears.
Yes. So my suggestion is, because one of the things that happens when you're kind of together and, I don't know how often your partner and yourself see each other, but if you're kind of used to a lot of contact.
We live together now,
Oh, you do? Okay. So you're kind of used to that daily stuff.
Yeah.
So it's about kind of having a realistic agreement about what's expected. Because when you're travelling, and especially if you're going to be travelling in the countries where you're not quite sure how much access you've got to internet, or you might be going off on treks that you're kind of unavailable for days or weeks. What you don't want to have happen is kind of at the beginning saying, we're going to speak every day, and then you can't maintain that, and then that leaves his interpretation to be very open as, she said she was going to phone me every day and now I haven't heard from her for 3, so what does that mean? So kind of getting realistic about that.
That's really good advice.
Yeah, and it's something that I know that's happened in previous relationships with me, and I know it's happened with several friends. Is like you're kind of very, you're going to miss each other, so you set something up that's quite unrealistic.
Ambitious.
So be realistic about it, and it's just being able to kind of say what you mean and check.
I think we'll probably
to check.
Try and do Skype or whatever. Because he's not really an email kind of a person.
Like you could even say, if you don't hear from me in a couple of days, it doesn't mean I've forgotten about you. It means that I just don't have access to internet. You kind of,
or that I've been kidnapped and being held against my will.
And if you don't hear from me in a week, then it's time to worry.
She's going to South America, aren't you?
Central America.
Central America. Okay, so there will be times
when you could be kidnapped. Well, thank you,
we will
Charlotte.
trust instead.
And on that happy note,
you're welcome. Thank you for having me.